So language really matters a lot in jobs to be done. The words that you use to formulate job steps or outcome statements, for instance, it really matters. And if you ever taken our course with Elaine and I, you know that we spend a lot of time looking at how are you going to formulate that the best way? Is that the best verb to use? Is that the most compact phrase that you can use? And that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about how language matters. My name is Jim Callback. I'm the author of the Jobs to Be Done playbook and the co-founder of the Jobs to Be Done toolkit, along with Elaine. Hi, Elaine. Oh, you're muted. You're muted.
Still making that mistake. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Matthias. I am the other co-founder of the Jobs to Be Done toolkit, and I am also a digital product designer. And we're just excited to have everybody here today. We have a special guest, Tonja Hughes, that Jim will introduce in just a moment. First, I'll run through the agenda for this hour and mention a couple of just sort of key things to expect if you're new to this community meeting. So our agenda, we'll go through a couple of updates for the Jobs to Be Done toolkit, and then I'll turn the floor over to Tonja, and she will be our guest spotlight for today. And then usually about the last 30 minutes or so, it's an open Q&A session. And you can ask us anything. We encourage everybody to sort of come on quote unquote stage. You can unmute, turn your video on, ask your question, and participate in the conversation. We also monitor the chat. So if you want to ask a question there or engage in the discussion in any way, we definitely encourage that. And we will take the questions from the chat, move them over to the mural so we can put them up for everyone to read and view. And again, this is all about participatory conversation around jobs to be done and today's special topic, language and bias. So please participate. All right.
Yeah. All right. New course.
Yes, updates. So we, at the beginning of the year, launched Foundations of Jobs to Be Done, the core framework. So Jim and I really looked at everything that we've learned working in Jobs to Be Done over the past couple of years and updated the Jobs to Be Done Canvas last year, the Canvas 2.0. And so building on that, we developed this course to really drill down into what's the fastest, most actionable way to get started with Jobs to Be Done. And that is this course. It's a very affordable $199, and it's a series of learning videos as well as other resources to put everything into practice, including the Jobs to Be Done Canvas 2.0. All right.
Yep. And then we should be back in a month from today, right, Elaine?
Yes, I have a link that I'll post in the chat in just a little bit for anybody that wants to register. But the last Tuesday of every month, we're here at 12 p.m. Eastern for this community meeting.
All right. All right. And don't forget to ask your questions in Zoom. Please put them in Zoom, and then we move them over and kind of prioritize them that way. So that's
Yeah, I typically take the questions as they come in. So, one by one, and then I'll sort of help guide Jim and Tonja through them, and I'll group them if relevant. But you'll be able to see the questions that are in queue on the screen.
Yeah. So our special guest, Tonja Hughes. Hi, Tonja. How are you?
Hi, Jim. Hi, Elaine. I'm so happy to be here.
Likewise, we're so glad to have you here. And you joined us last time just to kind of set it up for the folks. We've been talking a lot on Jobs to Be Done Untangled about AI and using AI. Our position is that it doesn't replace research, it just accelerates it. It can get you started really, really quickly. And I even created two chat GPTs or GPTs using chat GPT 4.0 to help you use the Jobs to Be Done Canvas 2.0, and it kind of walks you through them. We were demonstrating that last time, and like we said at the top of the show, language really matters. And Tonja raised her hand and said, what about bias? Are we looking at bias there, right? Because AI has its own biases. And then in talking with Tonja, we also were talking about our own perspectives that we bring to the table, right? So one of the cool things about Jobs to Be Done, from my opinion, is that it tries to get down to these fundamental universal jobs and understand them without all of the variables, right? Even variable of time and place and person and that kind of thing. But if we're bringing ourselves to the table every time we do that, and if we're bringing AI to the table too, I think we got to be cognizant about the words that we're using and things like that as well too. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit here. I just wanted to set that up, Tanya, before we hand it over to you. But why don't you tell the folks a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Hi, everybody. I'm Tonja Hughes. I am based in Los Angeles, and I have been working in strategy for more than 20 years. I predominantly have been working in marketing and advertising in what we call connections, planning, and strategy. And that is just being a co-pilot to strategists in branding, in product, in creative, in media, and ultimately trying to figure out how do we connect authentically in language, in behavior, in ways that are significantly touch points of people just living every day. So being able to think outside of my typical toolbox of strategy, I have become fascinated with jobs to be done because it actually gets me out of my head. It's another way of critically thinking and putting the human first.
Yeah, right. Putting the human first, and we've been like the rest of the world jumping on the AI bandwagon, right? They say if you're not using AI, you're already behind, and things like that. And we just kind of dove head in. To be fair to ourselves, though, again, Elaine and our position is that jobs to be done complements research and human judgment there as well too. But we kind of came out of the gate last time and we're just saying, hey, AI is this really great tool. And you said, yeah, but is anybody really checking the bias there? And I just wanted to start off kind of with that topic in the last episode that we did with you, Tanya. And what was going through your mind when you said, hey, there might be bias in that AI thing? And if you could tell us more about that.
So in my world, AI is a significantly big part today. And yet, when I look at different platforms, and they can be a variety of platforms, from working with people in employer branding, there are software as a service that feature AI when it comes to hiring people, retaining people, and performance management. And what I've discovered is there is something called language bias. And the language bias is essentially what we bring to the universal truths of why we do what we do. And a lot of times we don't actually recognize it. And it's called unconscious bias a lot of the time. So, and that's normal to have bias, right? But it's also important to be self-aware of your bias.
Right.
And that's a big practice for all of us.
Yeah.
And when we're not in touch with it, things can get out of control, as we have seen.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to just, raise the issue so that we're mindful of these things and have the intelligence to bring it forward.
Exactly. And like I said, in our courses and in our teaching, we'll say, I say very often, use a thesaurus when you're doing jobs to be done research, because that first verb in a job step is really impactful. And again, if you've ever been in one of our sessions, like, we'll deliberate over that word kind of in terms of like, what's the strongest verb to use. But I think there's some other lenses that we should check at the door as well too. Like, are we bringing in cultural bias or gender bias or regional bias or other things like that as well too? And I think one of the powers of jobs to be done is that it is this, it's this framework where you're striving to not make any assumptions. And I think, Tanya, correct me if I'm wrong, but we always bring a little bit of ourselves. I think that the key is, are you striving to check your assumptions at the door, right? And, have you really said, oh, not only is that the best verb, but is that a biased verb, right? So we want to ask ourselves these questions as we go along, particularly when stuff is just being spit out of AI. Like, don't take it on face value, right?
Right. I mean, we bring our influence, our history, and that can be good things when we're trying to bring in empathy. But then there are times when we have issues and you notice,
Oops.
Am I back?
You're back, yeah.
Well, just behind the curtain, I have no power power went off in my building. So
Uh-oh.
things are a little crazy, and I'm running not on Wi-Fi right now. So nonetheless, when it comes to how we bring ourselves to our work and ultimately how we show up in our work, just being mindful of, like you said, all the biases that come into play, from cultural to socioeconomic, language, unconscious gender. It's a long list of biases we don't even recognize sometimes. And so I'm always checking in with other people, and, it's about interviewing people. It's about talking to people and not relying on just technology.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And I think, from my standpoint, I think jobs to be done is stronger when it's less biased. The jobs to be done is stronger when you make fewer assumptions. And that's something that we teach. But I was wondering, Tonja, if you had any other kind of framework, or if you had any. I didn't even ask if you had any slides to present today. I don't know if you had any ways to help us.
No, this was just going to be
Think
a
about that. How do we check our biases at the door then? What's some things that we can be talking to ourselves or asking ourselves as we go along?
Yeah, before AI, what did we do? We actually read things. We actually formulated questions to ask people instead of asking AI. And it's real people. If you're familiar with a movie that came out recently, it's called Origin. And this movie is about connectivity, ultimately. And it's a film Ava DuVernay put out as a biographical picture based on the New York Times bestselling nonfiction book called Casts: The Origins of Our Discontents. And I recommend it because it highlights some interesting points of view across the globe, from India to Germany to the US, and the systemic problems that we have across the globe and the common denominators that are within. So just look into that, read the book, look at the film. But ultimately, it's about being curious, right? Mm-hmm. You don't, just because you know things doesn't mean you understand them. And knowledge is so important, but it can be so powerful. And if used in the wrong way, it can be worse than powerful. So I always think about, what are the things that I know to be true, but then also ask people, is it true for you? Because it may not be true for them.
Right. Elaine, it looks like you have a bunch of things going on there, and I'm pretty sure I saw smoke coming out of your ears with some questions. So
yeah, no, I've just been jotting a couple of things down. But so one of the things that struck me, Tonja, when you were talking about origins is this, kind of seeking out this, like, the common denominator. And I think that that's one of the things that draws a lot of us to jobs to be done, is that it sort of gives us, like Jim was talking about earlier, it gives us these buckets where we can put all the variables in, but we can really still down and look at, like, what is the common human experience that people are having around whatever the field of play is. And so I'm wondering, like, as we're going through that process, as we're sitting in meetings and talking about the specific ways that we want to reference, like, the job performer or describe the job steps, what are some things that we should be on the lookout, or are there parallel activities that we could engage in which to kind of deconstruct any potential biases in the wording that we're choosing?
I always relied on the thesaurus.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I know when I think of a word, I'm like, is that the word I want to use? And plus, I have a background in French, so I can draw on that. And so I'm lucky in that way of having etymology a little bit in terms of origin of words. But when people don't have that background, it's important to just know that there are other ways to help you. And thesaurus is a great way to do that. Jim and I were talking last week about an analysis, and we were like, is that the word? Maybe there's a different word. And so again, it's about knowledge and understanding ultimately.
Yeah.
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 Actually, I have that here. Elaine, you can ask your question, but I would love to dive into some of that and replay some of the conversation you and I had, Tanya.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that like both the thesaurus and like looking at the etymology in the dictionary are really just great like core activities. And you can do that like screen sharing with your team also. Like it's a great way to surface synonyms. That's one of the things I always do. Like
Mhm.
how does our like instinct change about this statement if we change this one word and use a synonym? Do you
Mhm.
agree with it more or less? Kind of getting people to comment on that. I think is a really great way to go about it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And one thing that we teach, Elaine, when we're talking about jobs to be done, just one question that we use to shift perspectives is, what did they do 50 years ago, right? Because we're trying to look at the job independent of any technology, and actually a time shift can be one of those mental shifts that you can use to kind of check your biases at the door. In this case, we had buying and selling homes. That's kind of the domain that we're in, assuming a company that's in that domain. And then we said we're going to focus on home buyers as they're shopping for a new home, right? That was kind of the framing of our research focus. And then I went out to ChatGPT and had it generate a job map, emotions, social aspects, outcomes, and job differentiators, the kind of the four key elements that roll up to shopping for a new home. And then we got a bunch of stuff that we were then reacting to. And I was saying, well, what did again, the question I bring to the table is, what did they do 50 years ago? Because that's a way, Tanya, I think, to kind of shift your perspective, right? And I think another one, you just brought it up too, is, well, what would they do in a different country? Or what would they do in Europe, or South Africa, whatever you want to pick. Or I just saw Danny there in Brazil, right? Like, how do they shop for a home in Brazil? And if I can describe it in language that is independent of time and independent of location, I'm starting to question my own biases, right?
Mhm. Yeah. When you think about what people do in the course of their life, there's something called the rites of passage, right? And those can be these events or rituals that mark significant transitions in a person's life. So it's birth, it's puberty, it's job, it's marriage and death. And so these rituals can serve often as this time of change in their social status. And so you might think different things at different times in your life is ultimately what I'm getting at. And how
Mm-hmm.
does that
Yeah.
work in this category of home buying is quite
Right.
significant there.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good one too. I like that. That age is another shift. So we can shift our mindsets by time. We can also think about young and old. We can also think about different countries as well too. I'm actually working on another project with it's a lot of it's health insurance, and a lot of it's Medicare, right? So we define the job performer as seniors with government sponsored health insurance, right? And just that framing of the job performer is like, oh wait, they're over 65, right? And that affected how we were going about the analysis as well too. So those are some interesting dimensions to think about: the age, location, time. I'm wondering, you brought it up, Tanya, about French too, because I know there's some folks. I know Sabrina's native German speaker. Danny speaks Portuguese as well too. I guess some other folks too. Jan, I guess you speak German, Jan. There's a lot of folks on the phone where English isn't their first language too, and I was just wondering what if that might be a perspective shift that you think about as well too, Tanya.
Yeah, in terms of cultural differences, and ultimately how people are brought up in their families, what family means in different places, and ultimately, weighing that work-life balance is also significantly
Hmm.
different. Um,
Hmm.
and depending on where you are in your stage of life,
Hmm.
generationally speaking, and ultimately there's so many things that you can even segment even further.
Yeah.
But power's back on. So
Well,
oh shoot, I'll be back. I have an alarm going off.
All
I'll
uh-oh.
call you.
good.
All
We'll hold
right.
down the fort for a moment.
Yeah, right. So again, this was the analysis that I did with ChatGPT, and I didn't update this at all, Elaine. So like, there's mistakes right away, like no ands in your job steps, right? Everybody know that. Everybody took my course, don't know and. So this is literally just ChatGPT. It's not cleaned up at all. But you know what I thought might be fun? If we go through some of these and let's like kind of do it as a group, right? We can say, okay, shopping for a home buyers, and here are the job steps that it spit out. Let's put every word on the scale and see where we end up. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
All right. So home buyers buying a new home, ChatGPT says determine budget and financing options. What did you think about that, Tonja? Did she freeze?
She might have froze.
You know what probably happened? Her router probably reset or something like
Oh
that.
yeah, that might have.
And the light is
I
the little globe light is blinking on her router right now.
I think Jan had a really nice comment. Maybe Jan,
Yeah.
if you would be willing to come on while we wait for Tonja to reconnect, because you mentioned that you see jobs to be done as both adding and taking away bias, or bringing in and taking it, bringing in and taking it also away. Do you want to comment a little bit about some of what those observations look like?
Yeah, well, hi everybody. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I thought this bias question has been bugging me a lot, because I think it's well, Jocelyn has these two tendencies. So I also see that it kind of enforces, it can in some cases enforce biases, especially more aspirational we get. I think at least on of course I never do this, but my clients quite a lot of these, the more aspirational it gets, the more I think you can get close to sneaking in more biases, or because it's much more about values and these higher stuff. Whereas I think exactly as you mentioned, the kind of the wordsmithing on the focus job is really where you can get bias out.
Right.
There is exactly where jobs to be done kind of also helps.
Right.
I also see a different case where you can help understand, or jobs that can help you understand what the purpose of something is that you would neither enjoy nor ever buy. So
I'm back, by the way. Sorry.
Yeah,
let's go over to you. I just wanted to make a comment.
We'll let Jan. Do you want to finish your comment?
Yeah, finish your thought.
We had Jan come on and follow up with a comment he made in chat while we waited for you. So, Jan,
it's a cliffhanger here. You got to finish now.
Yeah, I'm the clown in those 30-second segments, and then only but is everything fine, Tonja? I think you mentioned an alarm or something.
Oh my goodness. So my Wi-Fi came back on, which interrupted my feed, and there was an alarm that had turned off. I hope the power stays on for the duration. So my apologies. Can't control everything.
Yeah, it's all good.
But that was my comment. So back over to you.
Okay.
So you had a question about the first line, determine budget and financing options.
Yeah.
And so this is where I look at knowledge and understanding, because if you think about, if you took an SAT or if you took tests to get into college, and you do apples are to oranges as blah is to blah. And so in this case, I think of budget is to knowledge as affordability is to understanding.
Interesting.
Because budget and affordability both can be true. But when you just look at budget without affordability, that's where I feel like there's something missing there. So I think affordability is an important part of this context.
So I just rewrote that here.
I like that.
So this was ChatGPT, Lane, right? Unfettered here, right? Unvetted. And then I rewrote it as determine affordability. What do you think about that, Elaine?
So the thing that and Tonja, correct me if I'm way off base with this, but the thing that I'm understanding with language around determine affordability is that there's an act that, like, the customer or the job performer is taking that is responding to let's say, the media or information landscape. So they're assessing the information that's coming to them through the various platforms or the various media channels, and they're making decisions about the options that they have in the marketplace. And this seems to account for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, basically understanding what their true reality is.
Mm-hmm. So is determined budget different or better or worse than determined affordability? Is determined affordability better, Ben, do we think?
Is it a discrete step?
Well, that's
That's a
a
good question.
fascinating jargon. Discrete step.
I
What does
think it
discrete
is.
step mean?
I think it is.
Like, would it go in between, would it happen before determined budget and financing options? Like, are you
I see
making
what you're
decisions
saying.
about determined affordability?
Oh, I see.
Sort of step one.
I was seeing these as synonyms, like a rewriting. I didn't. So you're saying that this is like a sub-step of that or something like
Yeah,
that.
because for me, there's something external about the affordability conversation, whereas the budget and the financing options are sort of a little bit more internal and based on your own personal financial situation.
Right.
Whereas determined affordability is more about like the broader narrative in which you're operating. At least that's how I'm interpreting this.
Okay.
I feel like determining affordability is a little bit too vague and broad in itself, and might benefit from a little bit more context, like determine affordability of what?
I see. Well, it's in this context of home buyers shopping for a new home. So you see, you put the target job here, and the canvas has this dark line. So the assumption in this analysis is that this job step is determine affordability about a home to buy, right?
Yeah.
So we could qualify that here. What's going to happen though, Nico, is that every one of these steps is just going to have the same thing on it. So we typically try to make it lighter and just assume that it's always about buying a home. But did you have something specific in mind, Nico?
Oh, yeah. So I understand what you just said. Thank you for clarifying, though. I don't know. I guess I felt, so going back to the discrete steps comment, determining your personal budget is one step, and then determining financing options is another step. And I feel like if we replace those two concepts with determined affordability, we might lose.
You might lose those two things. Okay.
Yeah, the specifics.
Gotcha.
And just to counter that, Cynthia made a comment in the chat that based on her research in finance, affordability sounds like it might be a clear word to focus on. So, we're getting some, I think it's both of those perspectives are a really important part of the conversation. Like this is sort of what we want to see when people are practicing jobs to be done, like
totally.
knee deep in the mix.
Yeah.
Like, what are we really talking about here, you guys?
So back to Nico's comment, I just split this into two steps. Yeah, sorry, Tony, I'll get you in a second.
Sorry.
I just want to show folks what I did here. I split it into two steps because as we teach, you don't have any ands in job steps. It's either you got to find a way to write it in one or you separate it in two. Just for the sake of argument, I separated it in two because we thought determining budget and determining finance options are actually separate. And then we have this determined affordability as an alternative to one or both of those things as well too. So this is kind of what we have here. What was your thought, Tony?
Well, first of all, affordability is obviously wrapped with budget and financing, but I like what John said. It's a little vague, I think he said. And to me, determine affordability based on my current lifestyle, right? I mean, or based on what I'm doing now. I mean, I could cut back on certain things if I want to afford more. I can,
right. Well, that's part of the question, isn't it? Often.
Yeah.
Okay. So we think determined affordability might be too vague. Is that what it is? Yeah.
But if you put it in the context of determined budget and affordability, I think it covers more ground that way in context of, what someone might think about when they think about the word budget and what someone might think about when they think of affordability, because they could be two different things for people.
Right. And according to, and now according to my rules, our rules, and if you ever take in my course, you know that I'll come over with a ruler at this point in time and say, you cannot have an and in there.
No, and I just knew you were about to say that.
It's either two separate concepts, or now I'm going to put this to the group. Is there a word that incorporates budget and affordability in a better way that doesn't have assumptions and biases in? Is there a word like determine how much to spend or something, or determine spend?
Yeah, ability to spend.
Yeah.
I think Jess is also doing a good job of kind of drawing the conversation back to some of these biases, because there's an element of affordability that suggests that people might exclude themselves. So like they would like to be home buyers. They would like to engage in this process.
Interesting.
Don't see it as a viable path. Tonja, what do you think about that?
That is a major sticking point for so many people on the West Coast. So you're on the money there.
And so if
No
we're
pun
driving
intended.
towards market innovation, how does kind of surfacing that piece of information through our conversations help us move through this process or move through the framework? Is it a pain point? Is it an area to dig deeper?
It's a tension.
Yeah. Is it a spin-off jobs to be done application?
Maybe we need another bucket. You know, the jobs to be done canvassy lane has those buckets. Maybe there's like I don't want to call it a garbage can, a parking lot, or another like a spin-off bucket, right? Right?
Yeah. Where you're talking about people that would like to be included as a job performer but can't for whatever reason. Yeah. That's what's
we could go the other way too. Sorry, I'm being curious here. It's like, how do billionaires shop for homes? They probably don't think about affordability. It's just how much they want to spend, right? So if we want to write this independent of time and independent of income and independent of region, we'd have to find a word somewhere between budget and affordability, I think. And I'm not sure what that. Anybody got a thesaurus, Sandy? Who's going to come up with a word here? Yeah, maybe I just want to go back to Jan. Like, what would you do here, Jan?
Oh man, I was hoping you wouldn't put me on the spot.
I'm calling on you. You raised your hand earlier. Now you are go-to guest.
So to be fully transparent, what I'm doing, I have ChatGPT open here on the left-hand side.
Nice.
I'm trying to find out the words that might make sense. Because it's a difficult one, but I tend to agree that affordability is kind of more open, because I feel like budget and financing options sound a tad solutiony to me.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So well, because you could say, I mean, there's different ways that you can pay for a house. You can ask, if you have a billionaire dad, you might want to ask him. So and that might not be having anything to do with your, well, okay, you could argue that's a financing option,
right?
But so that's where I appreciate the move away from budget and financing option, because it sounds less solutiony, but I see that affordability is very broad. Right. I was looking more in this. I don't know what it is in how to say it in English, but if I can like figuring out if I can carry the house, like how can I in German die Tragbarkeit.
Tragbarkeit.
You know what? Let me.
Okay. I know what you mean. Yeah.
Is it like risk?
No, it's more like it's like how much can you carry? I mean, it's literally what it means.
Exactly.
Like,
yeah.
Like your finance power.
Okay.
Over time.
Affordability or feasibility, but maybe there is no word. But in Germany, you have the financial.
Yeah.
what you can carry. Yeah,
What you can carry. Yeah, that's interesting. And it's interesting you bring that up because the words that you use in different languages, like that's right there. And the Germans have a word for everything, as I always say.
Is it the burden that you're basically talking about, right? It's a financial burden.
Yeah, it is a little bit burden.
Yeah, and how much of how big is the burden that you're okay with?
Yeah, right.
You're okay with.
Burden limit. now we're good. I don't think you let.
Now we're making it worse. I think.
No, well, you just made it worse, Jan.
There's a brilliant German word for this, verschlimmbessern. So make worse as you're trying to make it
I love
better.
that
So
word.
maybe...
Yeah, that's a nice one. Yeah.
So anyway.
Jim,
sorry,
I just want to draw your attention because we do have some questions that are starting to pile up down below in the Post-it notes. So maybe we can shift to answering some of those in the context of this conversation.
Yeah. Let's look at it. Where do we want to go, Elaine?
I think start with Cynthia. She has a really nice tactical question here. Cynthia, do you want to come up and ask the question to the group? Or
hi everyone. So I guess this was just a question, just interested in everyone else's thoughts. I know when I've been doing jobs to be done and putting together a map, when you're at the end and combining everyone's thoughts, you kind of have to play a game of like, okay, are these the same things to narrow it down? And some things I've done is use the parentheses. So I try to follow the rules, like don't use and in a good verb, but like I'll use specific things to describe it, because I find that that's just really helpful when handing it off to other people to read or when we're talking through it. So I guess I'm thinking, if I provide those words, that'll help provide clarity. And then at least at that point, we can talk about if we should change the verb or other words that are in it. So I guess that was just my thought.
That's good. So I just, as you were talking, Cynthia, thanks for that too. I just took that example and I said, well, what would happen if we said determine and then this magic word that we need to find right there, e.g. budget affordability burden, right? Like, is that kind of thing you're talking about, Cynthia? You might do?
Yeah. So like maybe like in the example we're going over, if the user provided other indicators of how they felt about budgeting, and like my final map, I did use the word budget, but it is a really broad word. I may use like the specific words. It might be project cash flow or determine income, because maybe some people are more determined or more concerned about their cash flow. Other might be like looking at like a new job that they may have to buy a house.
Okay. I like you. I don't know if you use those Jan in your work. Sorry, I just keep going back to you there, but like parentheses can help. I don't know what you think about that, Elaine, with the parentheses example.
To be perfectly honest, I feel like with all of these examples in the parentheses, it seems like you should just focus on that as the job map. Like that, determine spend range for a home is sort of the sub job.
Yeah, right. I think
scope.
And just leave it at that.
Yeah, because one of the comments Jan just made in the chat is, could we use the language determine the financial capability, which I think is it sounds very good, but we're still kind of circling around something that's a little vague. And I think it's because we want to reflect all of these sort of sub steps or variables around budget, cash flow.
Right. Yeah. Right. I agree. And I'm pretty sure if Brent Schmidt were here, because he's done this to me in the past, he's like, nope, just leave it at that high level. Like that's what the job map is just find that high level one. To Cynthia's point, though, sometimes there's political things that you're trying to do too. Like stakeholders are looking for certain words, right? And you're going to lose them if you don't have those words in there. One thing that I've done in the past is I've literally I'll put it behind, like I'll go determine financial capability. And then it's like, oh, what do you mean by that, Jim? And then if you do have that tangent conversation, but then you say to Elaine, to your point is, no, this is what we're focused on, like that. So I do capture that. Oh, there's the bucket, is you put it behind. There's like a layer behind there as well too. And I think Tonja, just some of the points that you were making too, some of those other perspectives that we might want to represent. Like we want that job step to be as pure and unbiased as possible, but there's some other dimensions that we might want to represent. We can offload those either to parentheses or like behind door number 1 kind of thing, right?
Yeah, when you think about home buying and the hiring of that job in particular, and what you think about, what is it that who are you targeting ultimately? And the considerations of, okay, it needs to provide shelter, security, comfort, a sense of belonging in the community. That's to fulfill all those things a lot of the time, but may not have to fulfill all of those things for some people.
And some of those things I would capture as aspirations, to Jan's point about the hierarchy. Some of those things go up. So what we end up doing in Jobs to Be Done is we separate things and we park things. So if you say, you know, sense of belonging, I would say, oh, that's an aspiration that goes up here. You know, if you say a certain emotion, I would put that over in an emotional bucket, right? So we capture all that. I guess the question, you know, here is like, how much do we want to put every word on the scale? I don't think we can do enough of it, but at some point in time, we got to stop, right? At some point in time, our analysis has to be over as well, too. And I think what we're trying to impress upon the group, Elaine, a little bit is to be curious and to not just, well, first of all, don't take what ChatGPT spits out in any case. But second of all, be curious and try some of these shifts of language, time, gender, location, to see if your job step still holds true.
Yeah, evolving, I think, is a key point here. Where you started 3 months ago might be different later, and I think that means you're open-minded, flexible in this approach, is coming through.
Totally. I'm going to move on, Elaine. Is that okay?
Yes. Yeah. So just a quick check-in. Jess and Danny, I think, have really great kind of deep dives into the conversation with their comments. And then the last question we have kind of digs into like where research fits into all of this. So that was Ellis's question started a larger chat.
Gotcha. Do we want to go to Jess then, Elaine?
Yeah, I think so. That sounds good.
Hey, Jess. Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
So yeah, I've done a bunch of stuff in this space, and kind of like the other comment that I put in the chat, I think it's really interesting to think about when we think about innovation or bringing more inclusion to a particular task, a particular area, like who might not even get to that first step? Who might think about, oh, budget affordability? Well, I could never be a homeowner. No one in my family's been a homeowner. It's probably not for me. How could I possibly do that, right? If we started in that step only, we would help a lot of people. But we might not actually be like tackling some of those systemic things that exist in our various countries, and actually be able to bring more people into that process. I think the other thing that we found through a lot of work we did in this space was that there's like the invisible step support network, which is, I'm a first-time home buyer. I'm calling my dad. I'm calling my mom. I'm calling my aunt or my uncle who's done this before, right? That's not a step that ChatGPT is ever going to give you.
No.
But if you're a first-generation home buyer, right, you don't have that. And so how do you have to completely reframe some of these steps to support people on those journeys? It's really, really interesting.
Great. I love those points, Jess. I just want to go to that one thing you mentioned, because I noticed it this morning. What you mentioned was what I would call a job differentiator. So we also have these buckets of job differentiators, and that one over here was having home buying experience, right? So what we found in our research is that you go through this fundamental process, but this would be an interesting one to kind of pull out and say, okay, now let's look at the job through the lens of a first-time home buyer, and that's where you're going to dig into some of those things that you mentioned. I'm not defending ChatGPT, but to be fair, ChatGPT actually came up with that one, Jess. So
I love what Jess just
and I think once you start, you can even overlap it with that post-it right next to it, right? Like, are you the first-time buyer, and do you have support or not? So you start to get really interesting overlaps from pulling some of those differentiators together.
Totally. But now this becomes the lens, right, for your actual then solutioning and where you want to focus, right? Because Jobs to be Done, all it does is lay things out for you to allow you to put your finger here and say, at the budgeting phase for new home buyers, we want to, and then you go solutioning. I think in innovation that I've seen, what tends to happen is people take too many variables at once and then go into brainstorming and say, hey, we want to come up with a solution for this. And it's not granular enough and there's not enough signal on those different variables, right? Yeah, so isolating those variables is key. But then once you have them, to your point, Jess, we can now go back and say, do we agree to look at it through this lens, right? Yeah, that's nice. I like that. Sorry, Tonja, I think you wanted to jump in here too.
Yeah, I was just going to piggyback on what Jess was talking about. I think she was speaking to generational wealth. Because, you know, having grown up in a family where you saw and you took in, you know, examples for better or worse, I think is important, and demonstrating that in those steps in terms of, do you have a family that has a background in home buying or not, I think is a crucial part of that, in that rites of passage that I was speaking to earlier.
I would argue that doesn't show up in the steps. That shows up in one of our other categories of information that you then overlay in that, because we want the step to be as pure as possible without any variables on top of it. But it does show up in the analysis, absolutely.
So when you want it to be pure as possible, is it basically, for another word, saying what in a perfect world it could be, to then be able to address when the world is not perfect?
Correct. And it's not even the perfect world. It's just what has to happen in order for it's not ideal world. It's what has to happen in order for someone to buy a home. And I would argue, in order to buy a home, someone would have to recognize how much they can spend, regardless of time, location, regardless of their budget, regardless of their gender. That has to happen. So what we try to do, and I saw you nod your head again, Jan, what we try to do is get to that fundamental job before we factor in those other variables. Because like I said, I think innovation gets off track when we conflate too many variables coming out of the gate, and then you put up a sticky note on the wall to brainstorm. Hey, this is what we're going to brainstorm. And there's too many ways into it and out of it. And what you end up with are solutions that are at high level, low level, they're all over the board as well too. Yeah. For me, a job map is really, that's just the spine. It's like black and white. There's no color on it. It's the scaffolding that you then layer on all the coloring. And by getting it down to this fundamental point like this, you also future-proof your thinking, because we ask ourselves, well, what did they do 100 years ago? Or what did they do in Germany? Or what did they do if you're a billionaire? It's going to also future-proof our thinking, because guess what? If somebody buys a home 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, or 20 years ago, they're still going to have to do that step. Conditions are going to be very, very different.
Question though, when you think about what was done in the past, do you, in building that foundation, that structure, that scaffolding, is there a way to improve scaffolding, reinforce scaffolding, or is it?
Yeah, those are those other layers that we put on top of it. I just want to understand, and you know, the Jobs to Be Done theory says, do you understand the job that people are trying to get done in its bare bones, independent of time, location, language, gender, and all those other variables? We want to understand that first before we layer on those other variables, right?
Okay. I
would argue, Tonja, that's unbiased.
Yeah.
Determine financial capability is unbiased, and when you do that.
The thing that I'm wondering is the bias not in the output here, but the use, like when we talk about thinking back 50 or 100 years to how things are done, we're talking purely about the technology that was being employed, not necessarily the circumstances in which it was being employed.
Correct.
And so I'm wondering if now we're like, part of the conversation here is not only bias in the conversation that we're having to implement the framework, but also in the framework itself, because we're not really clear that specific, that thinking is specific about just the technologies available.
Right.
not the people's access to the technology.
Now we're going real deep.
Yeah. But if we want to, Tonja, do you want to respond to any of that, or we can shift to Danny's question?
Yeah, I think what I'm always coming from is a place of inclusivity. So, and I think my experience is going to be very different. So my point of view and therefore my bias, right? But at the same time, I think it's important to recognize when we rely on systems of the past, we're setting ourselves up a little bit for not looking internally and saying, maybe there's something there that can be helpful in that structure from the get-go. Instead of assuming that it has to be this way, it needs to be flexible, right? So that you're prepared for the thing that comes down the road. Instead of it taking you off guard, you're like, we already factored this in.
Great point.
That's all.
No, I love it. Yeah. Danny, what were your thoughts here? And I think they're related to Jess's comments too.
It's Jim, it's very, and Tonja, it's very funny because here I run every day with friends in a garden near my house. And all days they changed the mind. It's the last day changed the mind. Imagine if you talk about a survey, they will change every day. Imagine an AI to try to understand the speaking of these people. This is so difficult, Tonja. Do you agree?
Language, right? We're all trying to understand each other, but sometimes we have knowledge of things and we think of that as understanding, and it's not necessarily the case. And that's what I'm just trying to draw a connection to for everybody.
Okay, but do you agree that AI is not the same of listening these guys every day?
Oh my gosh, it's totally not. In fact, it'll give you an answer and I say, are you sure? And then it will change the answer. I'm like, I can't, you're not a reliable narrator.
Okay. I think, okay, I agree that they can change. Okay.
All right. Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Danny. I appreciate that. And you mentioned, you already name checked Ellis, Elaine, and I think you were saying they started everything off here?
Yeah, Ellis's conversation started off a short chat about where research fits into this. And so, and how research would inform the conversation. And I know that sometimes, obviously we always advocate for research as early and as frequently as possible, or at least I do. But, sometimes it's not possible, right? And so the way you formulated the canvas, do you want to speak a little bit about that?
What's that up here?
Yeah, or just like where research fits into this conversation.
Yeah, the one thing, Ellis, I don't know if this is where you're going to go, but one criticism of jobs to be done is it's very artificial. Like you go out in the world and you talk to people and they might say affordability and budget and things like that. And then you do that kind of parsing that we just did. And then you come up with a verb that nobody actually ever said that verb. Right. So I know, like, I've done ethnography before, and you try to reuse the exact words. Right. So there is a degree of artificiality. And I think that's a criticism of jobs to be done, because you're not actually using the words that somebody might use themselves to describe their own situation. Is that the kind of thing you're dancing around, Ellis?
Not so much, like just with any other framework, you kind of the different contexts you find yourselves in with your clients, you got to bring, the scale of whatever framework to bear for that client and that situation. And so oftentimes I kind of develop my own kung fu to determine, what type of process am I going to bring? How can I do just good enough versus over designing the process or things like that.
Agree. I hear you. I tend to be on the pragmatic side of things as well too. And I know when I do some of the coaching, sometimes I throw my own rules out. Like, I'll do a training session, we'll say the rule, and then they describe their political or their situation with their client, and I say, no, just use that word, right? You are trying to adapt, right, and trying to survive. You have limited budget, and there are other forces that affect the language that we end up using. Then in the end, yeah.
And Jan has a great question to end on.
Okay. You're back on, Jan.
Well, I was playing around while listening. Can you not use AI? I think
right.
Tonja
asked me that question actually. Yeah. So what's the answer, Jan?
Well, I put into JTBD here now, just find the less biased way to say determine budget.
Yeah.
And it's out to assess financial resources.
Assess financial resources.
Like so, and then I asked what is the bias that he took out, and then there is a whole bunch of stuff about. It's a long thing, so I wouldn't read it. But maybe I think it's you can also, so it's a tool, and I think it will spit out biased stuff like any human being.
Right. Yeah.
So it's an additional. Maybe it can even add an additional perspective. So why not include that as a quality check?
Sure. Yeah.
I feel like it could even be less biased than I am in some cases.
Ooh, I'm going to let Tonja respond to that.
No comment.
You don't think so?
No, but I do want to just hop in here because we have a few minutes left. Tonja, feel free to respond to that, but also if you have any final comments, anything that you want to leave everyone with, this floor is yours.
I'm sorry if I've missed anyone in the chat. Please feel free to look me up on LinkedIn. My name is spelled TonjaHughes, and I'd be happy to answer your questions there because I'm looking at through a mobile device right now. So I find that this is super helpful because I think we all want to demonstrate that we're trying to do things to make the world better. And in this connection process of connecting to people internally here, we learn a lot about ourselves and questions that we can ask in the future.
Right. Love it. Great final word. And stay curious. I think that's the thing. Back to my earlier comment too. It's that we're striving towards being unbiased, and we're striving towards questioning how we're using language. I think that's the key thing. To Ellis's point, you may be flying at 1,000,000 miles an hour, right? And you're going to have to cut corners, right? But let's overall, as long as we're all striving towards this, I think that's the key, right?
Exactly. Thank you, everybody. So happy you all joined in.
Tonja, thank you for being our guest here today. It was an absolute pleasure having you. Getting some thumbs up there from folks. Elaine, thanks again for hosting another great session.
A pleasure. Thank you, Tonja. This was a great conversation. I really enjoyed kind of digging into all of these things. And I think using the Canvas to sort of facilitate and explore what this looks like was a great idea. So thank you for participating.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
All right, everybody. We'll be back at the end of April. Be good. Until then.